So we've got Rosie Bristow from Fantasy Fibre Mill, Lisa Houston from Lauriston Farm in Edinburgh, and Julie Hermitage from Ewan Wool. So we're going to talk about wool and flax, and a bit about the field lab project that Innovative Farmers and Soil Association are running, looking at sort of modern fibre flax varieties, and how we can sort of kickstart a regenerative textile industry in Scotland at a kind of smaller scale, but there's also a lot of bigger scale interest as well, and how that fits into a kind of holistic food fibre fuel production system, and the kind of social aspect of it as well. So I'll kind of let everybody introduce themselves for 5 or 10 minutes, what they do, why fibre is interesting and important to them, and then we'll just have a kind of a discussion with the questions and see what direction that takes us. So we'll start off first with Lisa, talking about growing flax and your experience of growing that and being part of the trial.
So I'm Lisa and I'm part of the team at Lauriston Farm in Edinburgh. So we're a fairly new urban farm. We're 100 acres in Edinburgh, which is, to get 100 acres in a city is sort of unheard of anywhere. So we're very, very lucky. We really moved onto the site at the beginning of 22. We're kind of trying to make the most of what we are, which is a ridiculous size of land in a city. And the food is designed a lot, it's an agricultural farm, but it's designed around food, community and biodiversity. And the community part of it is really important because we can get a lot of people coming and engaging with what we're doing, so learning much more about their food system or their clothing system or where their bread comes from or whatever. So it's a big component of what we do is bringing as many people as possible along with us on the journey to be learning what it's all about as we are learning. So we've only been on site for 2 years. We're still figuring out how it all works as well. With the community thing, we have community gardens and community allotments for people to be growing their own food. We do a lot of teaching people how to grow their own food. We've got a community orchard, and we do lots of community events and workshops. We've got about a third of the land entirely given over to habitat creation for wildlife, but also getting people involved in creating those habitats, getting people involved in doing citizen science about what's happening with the worms, what's happening with the bats, what's happening with the birds and all that kind of thing. And then we've called it food, fibre and fuel production in an area, but actually then we're like, but what about the grassroots remedies doing herbal remedies? So it's food, fibre, fuel and medicine, but that doesn't fix it, to start with an F. So we started 2 years ago. This year's our third year growing season. We've got a CSA going with 100 veg boxes going out. So the market garden was really the first bit of food production. We've also started doing grains on a small scale, kind of as trials, although our grain trials are bigger than our flax trials. But are similar things on the farm, I would say, the grains and the flax, as in they're two things that grow actually really well, but it's all about the figuring out the processing that is the the harvesting and the processing. So I should say that also most of our food fibre and production is done, we're doing it in an agroforestry system. So we've got the first 4 tree lines planted with more to come, and where our grain production has started off inside the agroforestry system. So this is our second year of doing the flax trials with the Soil Association. So this year we've got 3 varieties that the Soil Association has given us. Each one is 30 square metres, and I guess what I'm talking about today is more about why would a regenerative farm want to put flax into the equation. For us, as I say, unusually we've got 100 acres in the city, so we've got land, so part of it's why not? Let's see, because it is all about for us learning what's going to work in this very unique circumstance of having 100 acres in the city. So doing the trials is great because it's giving us a chance to, on a small, very low risk way, figure out how does flax grow on our soil. And I would say this year, one of the greatest things about growing flax is while all the vegetables are being eaten by the slugs or growing at a very, very slow rate because of the cold and the wind, the flax is absolutely flourishing. And it's sort of like when you're looking at the sad vegetables, you look at the flax and you feel happy. So that's a massive benefit, and also a very useful benefit, because it means that we can start to be thinking about, well, would we be wanting to take this further? Because we're also this year starting to plan moving into kind of field scale cropping and thinking about what our rotation might be, and would we want flax to be a part of that is one of the questions we have. I think another big advantage for us in growing the flax is, like I said at the beginning, a big component of what we do is trying to bring people along with a kind of story about why we grow stuff. And last year in particular, when we were doing the flax trials with the Soil Association, it was also done in partnership with Edinburgh College of Art. And we did a number of sessions where the teachers from the art college came down with all the gear for to show the processing of the flax and the weaving of the flax, and people got a chance to do that. And one, we're always looking for, different people in the community are interested in different things. So this sort of brought in a different section of the community who were interested in that. So for us, that's already a gain, because we're trying to get people engaging in that and people, wanting to learn about clothing. But also it was fun. People were absolutely fascinated that you could take this stock and then immediately sort of pull it apart into thread, and like even when not as part of the sessions that we did with Edinburgh Art College, whenever we had anybody on the farm, we were able to say, hey, check this out, look what it does. And people were like, wow. And say, yeah, this used to be something that was really common in Scotland and we don't have it anymore at all. So again, kind of getting people in on the story has been great. And I think it was great seeing the fibre shed tent here, because it reminded me of all that kind of community engagement stuff that really gets people quite excited. And, we've even got images of, because we're wanting to do more work with schools, like could we have schools growing their own pot of soup, their own loaf of bread and their own tea towel or whatever. I don't know how ambitious we can go with the textiles, but like that sort of idea of it. But then so we're still, as I say, we're still working out so we're also looking at like is it good for our soil, is it good for our sort of general environment, and it is. There's lots of pollinators that are very excited about the flax, so it definitely feels like a really beneficial addition. It's hardy. This year we have been hit hard by slugs, birds, mice, like lots of stuff that hadn't quite discovered Lauriston yet, and it did this year in a big way, and the flax has been fine. So it's presenting itself to us as a very hardy and resilient crop that we're quite keen on. And I think we're also quite excited about the story of this being a lost crop and everything that we've lost with it, from the machinery for processing it to the stories to the cultures that must have built up around it, and being keen to kind of regenerate all of that as well. I think what's really important to us is working out it needs a collaboration in order to regenerate a crop that has been lost. So we know we can grow it, which is great, but there's going to be no point in us scaling up unless there's a market for it. And there's not going to be a market for it if there's no systems for processing it, and if there's no spinners out there, and if there's no weavers out there. So it really does require that whole collaboration between all the different partners to say, how do we get this as working as a system and get other people interested in it. And so I guess for us, our next stage is we are genuinely thinking about not this year, but next year, the year after, if we wanted to get the flax going into the field rotations, we wouldn't want to do that without knowing that there's the flax is going to go on somewhere. So that's one of the big things, which I think
segues beautifully.
It does. But the other thing that we're also very, very interested in is seed. We're quite a few of us at the farm are very involved in the idea of seed saving, seed breeding, lost varieties of seeds, and how do we get those going again. And flax is so obviously something that needs to be addressed with, because there just doesn't seem to be Scottish varieties of flax kicking about. We're having to bring it in from other places. So how do we start to change that story again to be having our own supply of Scottish seed? And I think for us, we would like to be we're part of the Scottish Seed Hub, which is looking to grow seed commercially. So could we be looking to sort of bring that into things? So I would say that's.
I'm going to tuck away that piece of information for later.
Grand.
Great, thanks. And yes, we'll segue nicely onto Rosie.
Okay, great.
About processing.
So hi, my name is Rosie, and I'm a part-time PhD student in engineering and textiles, and I'm also work part-time on a farm. And what I'm researching is how to build the machinery to turn the flax from being a raw plant into being a yarn. And I've got a bit of flax here. I'll trust you to pass it around, everybody. Yeah, so I'm really interested in trying to reconnect regenerative agriculture to ethical fashion. As you mentioned, the sort of missing part of that is the processing. So throughout my research project, I've spoken to a lot of farmers who are like, yeah, we'll try out a new crop, that sounds exciting. And I've spoken to a lot of like fashion designers or interior designers or even weavers who are like, yeah, we'd love to work with like locally grown organic linen, that sounds amazing. But what's missing is the knowledge and the infrastructure and the equipment to actually turn the plant into yarn so that it can then be woven. And so I've started looking into what's available in the UK right now, and the answer is medieval style spinning wheels, which is very charming but very, very slow. And what's available elsewhere in the world, so for example, there's a lot of flax processing in France, but their kind of setup is looking at like £6 to £8 million for a scutching mill, and scutching is only the first step in the process, and then you need that amount of money again to have a spinning mill, and that's really hard to get hold of. So what I've been looking at is, can we build smaller sort of farm scale processing machinery that will take the flax through to being a yarn, and make the machinery affordable, so that if a farmer is interested in trying it out as a new crop, they're not having to invest like hundreds of thousands of pounds into new equipment just to try out a new crop. And also farm scale in the sense of it being something that would fit into a barn and that would process maybe like 1 to 10 hectares of flax to start off with, whereas the kind of equipment that's available overseas, you need thousands of hectares of flax to be worth having this like big factory. So even if I magically had millions of pounds, there wouldn't be any point in having this like huge factory, because there wouldn't be the supply to feed into it. So what we've been developing is 4 different machines that do, so it's a breaking machine, which is like big fluted rollers that kind of interlock with each other and like snap up the flax. There's then a scutching and heckling machine, which are some fun flax specific words. So scutching is scraping, so that then scrapes off the outer skin of the plant, and heckling is combing, so there's then big metal combs that comb away, and what you're left with is sort of what looks like hair, so it looks like long silvery hair, which is where we get sort of flaxen hair from as a saying. I also love the etymology of heckling, which is actually where the phrase to shout at somebody on stage comes from, which was from a particularly sort of politically it was from some a particularly politically minded group of flax hecklers in Dundee, who were well known for turning up at local meetings and shouting at politicians. So that's where the word heckling comes from. and then the next machine is drafting. So you've got all your bundles of lovely silvery flaxen fibre, and you need to align them all into a continuous ribbon of fibre that's like really smooth and overlapped. And then the final step is it then is fed into a spinning machine and made into yarn. And so we've got a prototype of each of these 4 machines in sort of various stages of finishedness. And all of the machinery that we're working on is open source. So this is an aspect of the project that I'm really passionate about. And the idea of open source, it comes from actually software. So open source software is where the source code is openly available to anybody, can download it and edit it and make changes and use it however they want. And open source hardware works in a similar way. So our aim is, once we're happy with how the prototypes are working, we will put all of the designs for the machines online for free, and anybody could decide to download them and like build their own version of the machine. And I think my hope is that this will encourage lots of regional fibre processing hubs all over Scotland, or indeed all over the world, so that people can have their like bio-regional fibre processing hubs. So as well as doing the PhD, I'm sort of doing like a business startup with the idea that we'll make yarn, but we'll also make machinery. So there's kind of like 2 aspects to it. Because I sort of started this project thinking, I'd like to be able to grow my own dungarees, and then got off on a massive side quest to build my own machines, and then thought, well, I might as well share that machine knowledge with other people. So that's a kind of like end goal, is having lots of regional processing hubs all over the place. And I'm actually having an open day tomorrow, very short notice for you guys, but if any of you are in East Lothian tomorrow lunchtime, we're going to have a little tour, so ask me about that afterwards.
Okay, you're near the train station.
Yes,
so
we're near the East Linton train station.
Yes, we can share details of that.
But yes, that's
Thank
the end
you.
of my
And I
talk.
think that sort of missing middle and the processing bit, I think then ties very nicely into some of what you might say about kind of wool processing and having that middle scale kind of infrastructure, and some of that as well about the sort of regional hub model fits in really nicely with one of the talks that I was at earlier, where Toby Anstruther from Balcaski Estate was talking about, having small regional hubs and networks, and having them all very sort of interlinked to share, equipment, information, everything. So I think a lot of these themes are kind of common across, food, fibre, fuel, ideas, knowledge, lots of things. So that kind of ties nicely into Julie, who'll talk next about wool, and so that sort of fibre that you can grow, and then we can hear about fibre that comes from livestock.
Right, hello everyone. My name's Julie, and I have a little business, slightly different because I'm a wee bit further down the road from what Rosie's doing. If Rosie had been there 10 years ago, I would have been her best pal. Totally. My background is I'm a hill sheep farmer. And I had 600 sheep in 2010, 2011, 2013. Do you remember the big snows that we had? We had 6 foot deep snow drifts, and we were lambing, and it was the worst winters in it. And, it really was grim. And so that was the first kind of part of the story. The next part of the story is my son had just started school. He was 5 years old. And he was starting to disengage. He's an asthmatic, and he'd been so looking forward to going to school. And I kind of thought, what's going on wrong here? And he was exhausted, absolutely exhausted. And somebody said to me, they said, oh, you know, try them under wool bedding. And I thought, old wives' tale. But anyway, went out, got some wool bedding. 3 days later, I had a completely different child. I had a happy child that was managing to do school. And I just went, I'm a hill sheep farmer. We've had 3 seasons of hell in terms of wool production and stuff. And it's one of those stories where you couldn't see the wool because of the sheep. And I actually worked out, oh my God, we've got sheep. And after, you know, looking after them, feeding them for like 20 odd years. And I kind of thought, why is this never? Why, you know, so that was the eureka moment. And I just went, okay. And I then turned into a wool nerd. And because I had no knowledge, I was trained in agriculture. I did a degree in agriculture. I did an F-bomb and a master's. And I thought, okay, you know, I should know about agriculture. But wool was my passion. And I thought, oh my God. So when I was younger, when I was a kid, I used to go and do painting and knitting and all these things with my granny and my mother, and I thought, this is great. And it was just, you know, life, you sort of teenager, you grow up and you go and do other things. But with my son, I kind of thought, oh my God, this is, you know, this has changed his life, a really simple wool pillow. And I kind of thought, well, can't we change, you know, because we hear so much about people not being able to sleep, the problems they have. And you just sort of think, but this is a simple wool pillow, there's nothing in this is just wool. And that was the start of the journey, and I just kind of, you know, I was on a beeline mission to do this no matter what. I didn't think it was going to take me quite as long, and I was going to end up with 2 heads and look really strange and all the rest of it. And in my case, because of my background, I knew the Business Gateway process, and I applied for first thing, there was this design and action project which was design led, and it was part of the projects that were leading up to the V&A being in Dundee, and they needed to engage with rural businesses, which I was one, and it just so happened that I wanted to do wool, and I wanted to work with a designer to sort of learn from that. So I had you know, quite a bit of help from them, and then I applied for an innovation voucher, and that was done through Business Gateway. So I went off to work with Hermitage at Watt University and went off down to Galashiels, and in the time with doing that, my area, because with pillows your head is the heaviest part of your body, and it's like, you know, how do I support? And then, you know, one of the things with the wool was Alistair was asthmatic, it's hill sheep breeds I have. So I wasn't thinking of next to skin or yarn and anything like that. So I landed in the world of needle felting, which was always regarded as the black sheep out of, you know, knitting and spinning and all that sort of stuff. And it's, in one kind of sense, it's not that highly developed, but it is highly developed. The biggest needle punch processors in the UK will be British Felts, and they're actually doing underlay, and they're doing carpet underlay and felts for your cars and things like that. So if you open up the hatchback, the boot of your car, you see a grey material that's got little bits of white wool in it, or white wiry things. That is hardwick most likely, and it's just needle punched and it's shaped into it, and that's what is the material in the boot of your car, very simply. And so what I did was I started looking at things, and I started sort of saying, right, well, what machinery is there? How do I start this? And it really was, I had to take each of the individual breeds of wool, turn them into a ball format using needle felt to get the levels of resilience and how much weight they could actually take. And then, happy accident, I thought, oh, why am I not using 2 wools? Because, like, what's all the different characteristics? So then you have support, and then you have a little bit of bounce, and you have a little bit of comfort. So then we were developing the blend on it. Now, during this time, there was no textbook for me to go to, and I'm not textile trained, so I have no boundaries, and I look at things, you know, I just sort of ask questions, and then I realised that words in the textile industry can have 2 meanings, and I've gone off in the wrong direction, and you sort of think, oh, never mind. You know, you learn from these mistakes, and you just sort of think, right, carry on. But I went and I spoke to people like the Wool Board, and it wasn't so much the head office, it was the graders, and the graders, the people that are handling wool all the time. So then my next stage was learn about how the wool's characteristics, how they felt. But in terms of machinery in the wool industry. I mean, the vision of where Rosie wants to go with the flax and the linen, if we don't have that system in the UK, America has it, Canada has it, they don't have a wool board. We have been so shaped because of the wool board, because in 1953, after the war, all the farmers were told to put their wool to the wool marketing board and they would sell it, and wool became a volume product. We've had to go back the way to make some of these breeds and to make it to survive in a luxury point of view, where people like me come along and go, oh, but I want to do this to add value to wool. So, but that infrastructure, there is the artisan level, and then there's the 100-ton processing level, and there's very little in between. And part of the last 10 years is me navigating that, because my very first pillow was the most expensive pillow in the world, and it was at least £150. And that was me not putting on a huge profit margin. That was me sort of, because I learnt from the mistake of a lot of these people will say, oh, come with me, yes, we'll do all that, but we will charge you through the nose. And you just sort of think, oh, so you see that parallel with lots of kind of processing. So to be able to have sort of regional hubs and dealing with it, it's nice to have a big volume processor, and it's equally good to have the artisan, but there's nothing in between at the moment. And to have the little people to grow bigger, you need to have that middle processing. So some of the equipment I want doesn't exist unless I want to go and pay maybe 12, 16,000 to go and get it. At this stage, your machinery then becomes your critical points. And if you're trying to sell a product, because you know, once you spent all your own money, before you go and remortgage the house with the bank, you need to sort of say, oh, this is a black hole, hold on here. Let's step back a bit and say, well, how much money do you want to spend or can spend? And you can't, because really how you invest is your level of sales. And if you have a product like yarn or something that's going to turn around very quickly, because there's a known market there, it's an easy place to start because the machinery does exist. The bigger commercial businesses for knitting yarns have adapted their lines. They put in micro lines to be able to deal with the small quantities. They, you know, before 2015, there wasn't a yarn festival as such. And the yarn festivals have given platforms for smaller producers to go and add value. So, you know, hands up, they should be recognised for the achievement of what they've actually done. But because I was looking at a wool product that was a pillow and it was a household item, you know, I kind of thought, oh, I'm separate to them and they're doing nice things for the designers and I've got a boring old wool pillow. But 10 years later, my pillows I will stand and I'm very proud of. My husband, who was the, why do we need to clip them in this state? And why, you know, and it was little things like, once you get the clipping correct, once you get things like you're taking away, do not put dirty wool into a system that then needs to be washed out. So your belly clip goes into your compost heap. There's lots of little things that you can actually do, because once you start scouring wool and then processing wool, it's such an expensive, and you know, once you get over the shock of how much it's going to cost. And then, from my view, I never wanted, you know, as a mother, to give her son a pillow he could sleep on was always what I wanted to be. I didn't want to have a top-end luxury item. I didn't want to have a bottom bucket item either. So I've always tried to be that affordable level. But when you're not charging through the nose or putting it at a luxury market, you don't make so much of an income. So then things take a wee bit longer. And, you know, in my point of view, I have to slowly build the marketplace where I'm selling. There are, because of the designers and the yarn festivals, knitting and producing yarns for that. I would like to think in terms of the linen side of things. I've already said, oh, we can use my wool filling. Can we put the shells with flax, hemp, other fibres? You know, these are the starting points of where you say what products we can actually do. So, and a lot of the younger designers are now told about at the end of life of the product, and that's a big thing with me as well as end of life, is you're not putting a product that's then going to be a problem in landfill. So because wool biodegrades and in the different formats, and because there's no chemicals or treatments or colours or dyes, I know at the end of life of my product, which was actually quite a long way to go with some of them, but you know, this was me sort of thinking, I'm wanting to, you know, the pillow should be the best thing for that person that's sleeping on it, and that's to give them sleep. So there's ethical things in there. the farm has changed to some of the things we do, because it's a whole farm, could always be described as regenerative. But there's things that we've done in terms of tweaking the husbandry, which were little steps at the time that we just did, we didn't think about. We didn't, it wasn't a major change. I didn't have to go and change the flock of sheep or anything like that. If I had, my husband would have killed me. But we have sort of played around with different breeds of sheep to see how they would work and influence what we're doing with the pillows. So, but the processing and how you can actually take a product to market, and there's no better way than just going out there doing it, trying to sell it, and not to cry when somebody says to you, "Why are you charging how much? I'm not buying the sheep." That's been said to me a few times, and you've got to be brave and actually say, which is why when I say to people, "This is my £35 pillow, I'm really proud of it." I am really proud of it. But equally, there's lots of beautiful wool products out there, and never be, put off in your journey. Yes, it will be tough. And I know Rosie and Lisa will have situations where they're going to go, "Ugh," but it's really lovely to see them coming forward and developing. And yes, as I would like to see the wool side going. And for yarns, it's beginning to change quite a bit from what I can hear. But for somebody like me, at this stage, I go at the speed that I can sell at, if that makes sense, because that's where my marketplace at the moment. I'm not racking on John Lewis's door quite yet, because my fear is that, how many pillows would they make, and can I actually supply that? So until I have the confidence where I can say, right, I know I can do, say, 100 pillows in the month or 200 pillows, it's like I don't have the magic fairy supporting me yet, and I kind of need to have that. And it's like, where is this business going? Because I was looking at how could I add value to our wool, and I've got to be careful that at the end of the day I still want to have a hill farm. I've got teenagers now, and then where is the rest of the business kind of going? So and that's kind of about me.
Thank you.
You didn't kick me.
No, well, I think we're doing pretty well for time actually. So there's lots of questions and notes that I've kind of made, and lots of themes that kind of cut across quite a lot of things, and also with some of the other talks and sessions that have happened across these 2 days, and a lot around the sort of social connection and networking and exchange and sort of social infrastructure, I suppose, as well as the kind of production, the kind of process of growing crops or growing animals, and the processing, and how that all kind of fits together. And I think I want to sort of maybe touch on a bit, like we're talking about regenerative textile, like what do we mean about that? But before it just evaporates from my head, that thing about value of your product, I think comes up a lot. I know it's sort of, people talk about that with linen, kind of linen clothes and products, because they're more expensive than what you would buy, in Asda, George range sort of thing. But it's common also with, food, with regeneratively produced food, organic food. The cost more closely reflects the cost of production, rather than a kind of externalized cost that someone else is paying that cost. We're just not paying that cost for cheap food, cheap clothes, cheap wool products. So I think there's something about reframing value of what you're producing around, it's something that's going to last a long time. It's robust. It can be then recycled, composted. The sort of fibre shed. If anybody hasn't been across to the fibre tent, they've got the fibre shed kind of circle of soil to soil, and something being produced from the soil, getting its health from healthy soil, being produced into something used, recycled, and it can go back into the soil. So I think that kind of leads into like, what do we mean by regenerative fibre? And that's sort of through how it's grown, and also how it's processed, like for example without chemicals. So I don't know if anybody sort of wants to say, like, what does regenerative fibre or textile mean in your context, kind of thing, to just sort of unpack that a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, so I'd say regenerative textiles, in my mind, is very closely linked to regenerative agriculture. So it's something that is not just like sustaining the status quo, it's regenerating it. So it's maybe like adding to soil health or adding to the biodiversity on the farm. And we were having a chat earlier about like all the bees that really like the flax. So I feel like, growing flax as part of like a crop rotation can be beneficial for soil health, and it can be beneficial for attracting pollinators. And then I think also, if you think about it in contrast to the sort of status quo of what the fashion industry looks like today, where up to 70% of textiles are made from plastic, so like oil derived, which is obviously very polluting at the point of extraction and creation, and it uses a lot of chemical dyes which are also oil based and also very polluting. And then whilst you're wearing them, they're dropping a lot of microplastics everywhere, and then when you throw them away, they're just sitting in a landfill forever. And I think the idea of regenerative textiles is kind of like the antithesis of that, where you're really thinking about how is it affecting the world at like all the different steps of creating it and wearing it and then throwing it away. So it's really like contributing to regenerating the environment and not like extracting from the environment.
I think it's tricky, that thing of like, the reality is that a wool pillow or a woven piece of linen is going to be more expensive. The same way, the whole issue with food as well. I think the difference is with fashion, the reality is there's more clothes in the world than we need. So like, you can, like, why not spend any money on clothes unless you're getting a really nice piece of linen clothing? It's that kind of mindset that we need to be shifting to. So I think everything that Rosie's saying about the polluting effect of the plastic clothing, but also cotton is getting, if you watch any of the documentaries about cotton production and growing in places like India and how bad it is for the environment there, but also for the people who are growing it. I lived in Thailand for 20 years, and there's still people living in the hills around Thailand who are growing their own cotton and making their own clothes in the same village. So it's not, that to me, that is regenerative textiles. Like, they understand fully their item of clothing from the soil to the point of wearing, and there's a huge amount of pride in the design and the way that it's woven and the embroidery that might go on it, and the natural dyes that they're using. And to me, like, and they wouldn't know that there'd be people around the world going, God, that's cool. That's just like how they've always been doing it. But I think, I don't know if we'll ever get to there, but and we're probably going to in fact destroy that by bringing in cheaper options for them that are made of plastic but I think that to me is what it's about.
Regenerative to me, I kind of I see it as an annual cycle, because we're clipping the sheep. And in one way, because when I look at my sheep clip and I grade it and I go through it, each different types of, the wool from the ewes that have had single lambs, the wool from that have had twin lambs, they're all different grades really at the end of the day. And then there's the brock wool which goes onto the dung heap. And, so I look at that, even though it's just coming off the sheep, it's going straight into the cycle, it's been watered down. And I think because I know as a sheep farmer after 20 years I haven't got a pile of 200 tonnes of brock wool, I'm really thankful. Because it's like, how do you dispose of that? So, but because I know it's being used as a soil conditioner, a soil fertiliser, then to me it is actually an annual season type thing. And I think too, there is more of awareness now. It comes back to value, and it comes back to this perception that people are moving away from fast fashion, and there are people that are, you know, they look at clothes. Yes, they want to have maybe, you know, we have the different stages in our lifetimes where we'll go through these, you know, are we going out to the pub every Saturday night? Do we want a nice new top? And, you know, you then become, say, a parent, a mother, you're looking after children, you want the best for them. But invariably, the mother was always left with the cheapest clothes, which is why nylon came on. So mums have to learn to be kind to themselves, is the moral of that one. But, you know, in one kind of sense, it does come back to price. But I think there's education with people understanding what the costs are in the other societies and actually sort of saying, well, what we can do. So the linen, to me, is exciting. We still need to do an awful lot of work with wool. Wool can be used in the home a huge amount, but you know, some of the sheep breeds in this country, you are not going to wear it next to skin. Don't put people off by making them something really horrible and itchy. It's recognising what the breeds will actually do. So to me, there is the, you know, I sort of think if we weren't doing something with the sheep, because we farm at 800 feet, and I just sort of think, well, what are they doing? They'd be doing what next door happened to next door. And basically the farmer retired, it's a Scottish water property, it went to go out to re-tender, and then they decided that it was going to be planted with trees, so it's now planted with trees. Yes, we've lost a family out of the glen, and it's always about balance. So you need to have sheep, trees and everything working together within balance, and that whole regenerative, and you know, it's a kind of that kind of holistic approach is why we take. But it takes a huge amount of education and awareness, because little, you know, even from the fibre shed, my experience, people have little set bits, and it's actually having a bit more knowledge about the whole chain. And I've got lots of knowledge from the ladies today, so thank you very much. Yes, the wool board does need to do education, and but the wool board in some kind of senses are slowly beginning to change. So I would like to hope if it speeded up the change a bit more rapidly, and we'll see in the next 10 years where they're actually going, how fast they're going to be. But yeah, it would be nice. But the easy route to the farmers, because they listen to what the wool board says to them, they're disgruntled with the wool board, they're annoyed with the wool board, and that's why they are looking at alternative routes themselves, which is why we have, and a lot of them will go, oh, you know, it's more money, it's more time, it's more effort, and then they just say it's too much hassle. You know, you really have to have a driver behind you to sort of say that you're going to turn into a geek, because they've got to then put the rest of the business in the back burner, and it's too much for them to actually cope with. But I think once we've got more people like me starting to do different things and diversity of product out there, then they'll start going, oh right, you know, somebody else has done it. And the yarn is easy, but it's like it's at the stage where I can actually start helping other people, or having other people's wool come into what I'm using it in that kind of sense. But you know, we're a wee bit of time away from that. So yes, we'll get there eventually, I hope.
I think it's also, it's the same for, you know, it's been in some of the conversations, the lobbying of the Scottish Government to be giving farm payments also to people who are growing on less than 3 hectares, and that is the same for flax, it's the same for grain, because currently, like you've said, this is across all this is, whether you're doing grain, whether you're doing flax, whatever you're doing, there's this sort of, you know, this sort of very, very small scale, and then there's the massive scale, and there's very little incentives if you're going small to medium scale, and that needs to change, so that we can, and that, but that, like I said, and like Rosie said, it also is about demonstrating that there's a system in place. So it is about being like, we're only growing 2 acres of flax, but this is what we're getting in, because we've sold it to Fantasy Fibre Mill or whatever, or we've processed it ourselves and we've created wool and we're selling it to, not wool, what do you call it?
Linen.
Thread, the stuff.
Yarn.
You're selling it.
It's late in the day.
It's so late in the day. And we're selling it directly to our CSA customers or whatever, but it's about demonstrating a model that works, that maybe for some of the fibre stuff isn't quite there yet, and so it's that moving towards creating a model that works, and then, but it is that the small to medium scale growers and processors or whatever need that support.
I think, yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about different government policy. I think, and some of it could be more to do with like putting in more restrictions on like big businesses to say. So, for example, there's legislation that's come in France recently that's called extended producer responsibility. So, if you produce a product, whatever it is, you're responsible for what happens to it when it gets thrown away. So, if you make a polyester t-shirt and it then can't be recycled and it can't be composted and it just goes into a landfill, you get taxed or fined in some way. So, it's really like encouraging people that produce products to think about like the full life cycle and not just trying to sell it, but like what happens when it gets thrown in the bin. Also, there's legislation in Germany that's come in that's to do with making businesses having to adhere to like human rights throughout their full supply chain. So they can't say, oh, we've like subcontracted this and we don't know who made it, it's a mystery. They've got to be responsible. Like anything they want to sell in Germany, they have to like take responsibility for the workers, like all the way back up the supply chain. So I feel like that kind of government legislation could really affect the fashion industry in the UK in like a really positive way to like encourage them to have like transparency, and hopefully that would have an effect of companies then wanting to produce like within the UK and using natural fibres. And I think obviously the other thing that would be great would be not just like punishing people that are doing bad things, but encouraging people to do good things and like investing in businesses that want to produce natural organic fibre like locally. And I'm also working on an academic project at the moment that's actually to do with how to make the NHS more sustainable, which seems like a bit of a tangent, but the kind of branch of that I'm involved with is specifically looking at textiles in a healthcare setting. And at the moment, a lot of things that are used by the NHS are single-use disposable textiles. Actually kind of links into the bedding, so like and a lot of them are made of plastic, and so there's a big push at the moment to look at like what things can be made circular, so what can be a reusable item that can be like washed or sterilized and reused rather than used once and then thrown away. And I feel like this is like, I mean, this is thinking far into the future, but this would be a huge opportunity. For example, if the Scottish government was to say, actually, we don't want to source all of our textiles from overseas and have it all be disposable. We want to source all of our textiles from within Scotland and have them be long-lasting, reusable textiles that are like good for people's health to be like worn next to the skin, or like whether it's bed sheets or scrubs or whatever. And that would be like a huge customer that would employ loads and loads and loads of like farmers and millers and all the different people in the supply chain. So I think having like a government policy to sort of like introduce that kind of thing and encourage local production would make a massive difference to the industry.
Things like wool pillows and linen bedding.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Any other questions? So something else that was one of the things that a sort of theme that comes through a lot is the sort of social, I don't want to say social regeneration, but sort of social kind of infrastructure, I suppose, of that kind of knowledge exchange and building those networks and supply networks rather than supply chains. And I wonder if any of you have got thoughts on like how important has it been to each of you to have or not have kind of social networks around you that are people who can share information, or who have you learned from, or who have you not, what have you not been able to learn that you wish there was people there with the knowledge of, and that sort of infrastructure of people with the knowledge exchange and sort of support networks a bit, I think.
Well, I think when I started out, the first thing I said was, I wish Rosie had been about. It was a very lonely place when I started out because I was looking at bedding. I had kind of made that decision. That was my driver because I had an asthmatic son and I had made all the decisions that were the route that I was going. If I went back and did my time now, yes, it'd be easy to do yarn and I would have built up more cash behind me, but that wasn't what ticked my box really. What I was looking at was a bedding product because of my son sleeping and controlling the environment in his bed. And a lot of the time I was phoning people and they would go, she's a bit weird, or wanted to know a bit of, it was like, it wasn't in a textbook, there wasn't that many people. And that initial network that I had was actually the design project people, because they were the ones that were encouraging me. And then I was actually going to ladies in the rural who were like in their 80s, but they had worked with wool. And then I went to the wool board and it wasn't the high up people, they all kind of thought it was a bit strange, but it was the graders and they were the ones handling it. And when you start different stages in the business, you meet, some of the other market traders were really good, helping me in terms of presenting the product, price levels, that sort of thing. And it is very much trial and error. And I'm quite grateful, well, I have to be very grateful to my other half because he is the rock really who supports me, because at the end of the day, he's the one that listens to me complaining and all the rest of it. But to be in the situation where the model were Rosie and Lisa working and having that team of people, you can then bounce ideas off, and you're always meeting new people with new little bits of nuggets of gold information, and which is this event is really good for in terms of networking. And I've met new people, which to me is because I've been quite lonely because I'm the only person doing bedding, and it's like, yes, I can go down to the people in England, but they're not working with sheep in Scotland, and they're actually separate commercial companies that don't have sheep apart from one, and no, two actually. But because they are, how to say, quite competitive, they would be very, we're not going to speak to Julie, they'd be like, how much, and
steal their ideas.
Well, yeah, but it works both ways, and but they're very, at this moment, there's so few, they're quite, well, where's this going? And it's a marketplace that is still developing, is the term I would use, because wool bedding is only 1% of the bedding market. So there's loads of room for it developing and growing yet, and that comes down to education at the end of the day, and people understanding the value of sleep and what wool can do for their sleep in terms of that. So but it can be lonely, and I think in terms of but the other side of it too is the fibre shed. There's people there that support the team. And as long as you've got one good person you can cry on, that's the main thing at the end of the day.
Yeah, I'll say for me, I think we sort of started doing the flax basically with Colleen and Rosie's input, as well as the wider network of other folk that were doing the trials, and we've been learning from that a lot. I think moving forward it's going to be that all the questions around scaling up, so like from having a market to deciding, well, how far do we scale up? Do we do one alley, in which case we could probably just do it with volunteers, or do we do 4 alleys, in which case we might need some machinery? And those are and then what's the business model around that? Is that kind of like, at what point do we do it, or do we just do it like incrementally and go a bit bigger? We'll go a bit bigger, we'll see what happens until we get an idea of what the business model could be. So that kind of thing, I think, is probably sort of our next bit of the journey to figure out, I imagine, still together with the same sort of network, because we can't be the only people thinking this.
Yeah, I think having like a social support structure has been really useful, and I think so the if people haven't been over to check out the fibre shed tent, the idea of a fibre shed is that it's an area kind of like a watershed, but for fibre. So it's like what natural fibre and natural dye occurs in your local area. So having like a Scotland fibre shed and being able to network with other people that are also really interested in natural fibres has been really helpful. And then also I've found, like I mentioned before, that because it's an open source hardware project, it's very, very collaborative. So it's not just me on my own trying to figure out how to build all these machines, but I've been collaborating with Studio Hilo, which is based from Berlin at Berlin Textile Co-op, and they made an open source wool spinning machine, and so I use that, and that's what I've been adapting to make the flax spinning machines. And I've also been collaborating with Simon Cooper at Flaxland, which is down in England, and they've been incredibly helpful with like sharing their expertise. Also the Weavers, Spinners and Dyers Guild, which is like a network of weavers, spinners and dyers from like all over the UK, and I did their like masterclass in like flax weaving a couple of years ago, which was incredible. So yeah, there's lots of different networks of people who've been very, very like supportive of the project, like the Soil Association doing the seed trials, and then so what we're trying to do, so me and my business partner are trying to set up sort of like our own little network, I guess. So we've made like a Discord server online, so like a forum for all the different people that want to build open source textile machinery. So if anyone here is interested in building their own textile machinery, I can give you the details of that later. But yeah, yes. But yeah, so I think having a network and like doing it collaboratively is really important, because I think it means you can, rather than doing it in little silos and being like, oh no, I'm not going to tell you about my machine ideas because I want it to be a trade secret, but then it means you progress really slowly. Whereas because we've been doing it like out in the open and sharing, we're collaborating a lot, for example, with a guy who's at like West Virginia University in their agricultural department, and he's been developing like wool and cotton spinning machinery and then feeding back to us like advances that he's made on his machines that might be relevant to us. And that's like massively sped up our prototyping abilities, and we're not in direct competition with each other because we're all just looking at our own little bioregion, and like he's in Appalachia, so like I'm not going to be selling to like his customers, so it's nice having that like regional produce exchange but like a global knowledge exchange. I think has been like a really nice aspect of it.
Thanks. And I think sort of events like this and spaces like this kind of play a part in that as well, because I think there's been a lot of connections across lots of different kind of network sectors and things, and I think I might have said, oh yeah, Rosie might be able to design like a harvester machine with this. Somebody was talking about a sort of push along tractor thing, and I was like, yeah, that'll be our next thing of designing the harvesting
the
machine.
Engineering department. We're all going to be coming to you with the requests.
So so carry on.
Hi, I have a personal interest in hemp fibre, and I'm starting my journey into looking into that. I'm aware that there are quite a few hemp growers in Aberdeenshire, but mainly more for seed, for the nutritional side of things, because our institute have been supporting them. So on the support side of things, have you connected with any people on the hemp fibre side? And then the second question is whether your machinery could be altered to work with hemp fibre.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm in touch with a group called Contemporary Hempery, who are based at Wakelands Farm in like the southeast of England, and they actually sent me some hemp in the post, which I tried putting in the machines, and I was quite surprised it did actually like work first time. I think it could definitely be optimized. So hemp fibre is processed in almost exactly the same way, but it's much, much bigger. So, flax is maybe like this long, and hemp can be 3 meters long and much thicker stalks. So I think I've definitely got tweaks that I'd want to make the rollers bigger with bigger teeth, and maybe add in like a section of like bigger heckling combs with like wider tooth combs. But yeah, it can definitely be sort of like slightly altered.
And I think we could kind of go off on tangents for several hours probably with all the various sort of aspects, but yeah, do you kind of pick up with people after the session, or get in touch through Soil Association if you kind of can't remember somebody's name, or next week think, oh, I want to speak to that person, you know, get in touch through us and we can help, you know, connect people. That's, you know, a bit of what we're, well, what I hope to think that we're a bit good at. And yeah, our kind of role is to help make connections and disseminate knowledge, and sort of a lot of that kind of connecting and sharing kind of role. So thank you to all of you for coming and listening. Yeah, that we can go over to the big tent for the sort of summary. I hope everybody's had a really good day or a couple of days if you've been here for a while. I know we've had lots of very good connections, good conversations, lots to follow up in the next couple of weeks. And big thanks to Rosie, Lisa and Julie, our speakers. So yes, a round of applause.